Good afternoon to everybody. It's nice to be back talking to you. And it's an enormous and vast subject, the dependent origination, extremely deep and difficult to understand. I know it's one of Dr. Mariano's favorite topics when we had a conversation. He was particular about dependent origination. And I'll try to talk about it, just touch the surface of it in 1 hour. It will take ages for one to really go into dependent origination in depth. So let us have a look at it. Dependent origination. And in Pali, it's known as Paticca Samuppada. Paticca means dependent upon, and Samuppada means arising or origination. So generally, it's in English, it's known as dependent origination. And when you check the Buddhist literature, there are so many other terms. Dependent arising, dependent co-arising, conditioned arising, interdependent origination, a lot of other terms. And the basic, the key message from dependent origination is nothing in this world arises on their own accord, nothing. Living beings, you, me, humans, non-humans, plants, objects, thoughts, our emotions, the universe, the world, everything, according to this theory, arises due to other causes and conditions. So they are all relative and conditioned states. And probably, I think it's true to say that probably it's the most profound and central aspect of the Buddhist doctrine, the cause and effect and the dependent origination. There's a discourse called Tittayana Sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya of the Pali Canon. And in that discourse, Buddha refers to 3 theories that were prevalent in India at that time about what happens to us. And the first theory was that whatever happened to us is always due to past karma, good or bad. And that's called karmic determinism, pubbekata hetu. That was one theory. The second theory was that what happens to us is due to the wish of a creator, supreme creator, almighty. And of course, that is still there. And it's called theistic determinism, Issara-nimana hetu. And the third theory was what happens to us is nothing to do with anything, no cause. They just happened by chance, randomly, by accident. And that's called ahetu appacca. So these are the 3 theories. And Buddha went and spoke to all these people who were teaching this and asked them, do you believe in them? They said, yes. Then Buddha said, sorry. I'm sorry, my phone, okay. And so Buddha went and asked them, and they said, yes. Well, they said, well, then there's no one will take responsibility. If everything is due to past karma, if everything we do is due to a creator, if everything we do is just happens by chance, then people can kill, people can steal, people can sexually misconduct, people can tell lies, use harsh words, backbiting, idle chatter, and all sorts of things. And no one is responsible because it was all determined before. So Buddha rejected all these 3 theories and then presented the dependent origination as the possibility. And there were 2 other theories in India at that time with regard to existence. And one was called Eternalism, Sāsvatavada. And they believed that in us, there is a soul, there's a body, and the soul and the body are 2 different things. And when we die at the end of this life, our body dies, but our soul goes on to another body in the next birth. When that body dies, it goes to another body, and it's eternal soul going on and on. It's eternal soul. Second theory was annihilationism or nihilism. That's called Uchchedavad. They also believe there's a soul, but they believe the body and the soul are one and the same. So at the end of this life, when we die, both our body and the soul die, nothing remaining. So there's nothing to go on. And so there's no karma, whether we do good or bad, there are no consequences. And again, Buddha rejected both these extremes and presented the dependent origination as a kind of middle path. And Buddha said there's no fixed entity in us passing from one life to another, but there is a condition arising, condition becoming after this earth, depending on cause and effect. There's another sutta called Mahanidana Sutta in the Digha Nikaya. That's a collection of Buddha's long discourses, and where Buddha explains dependent origination in quite detail, really. And there, Venerable Ananda, that was Buddha's chief attendant, went to the Buddha and said, "Sir, this dependent origination appears to me as very clear, simple, and very easy to understand." And Buddha said, Mahevanananda, Mahevanananda. Don't say that, Ananda. Don't say that. Dependent origination is very deep. It appears deep. And it is because of ignorance of this dependent origination that beings keep roaring in the samsara, the cycle of birth and death, going through all the suffering. So Buddha described it as a very deep concept. And Buddha said, did not give a first cause for our existence. And Buddha did not describe the dependent origination as the origin. So it's a cyclical one. And it's so deep that when Buddha became enlightened, he was quite reluctant to preach, because the Buddha thought all these human beings are full of mental defilements. They will not be able to understand dependent origination. So he was reluctant. And then the story says that there was a Brahma called Sahampati. And when he knew that Buddha was reluctant, he came and pleaded with the Buddha, "Please, preach the Dhamma. There are people who can understand. There are people who got little dust in their eyes." And then the Buddha looked at the world through his mental power and saw that there are people. It's like kind of lotus buds in a pond of water, that there are certain buds which will take days to blossom, some less, but there are some lotus buds which will blossom as soon as the sun falls on them. So then Buddha decided to teach the Dhamma. There's another story. We know Buddha has two main chief disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana, and they were called Upatissa and Kolita during their life, lay life. They were disenchanted with life and suffering, and they were looking for a way out of suffering, and went to a teacher called Sanjaya Bellattaputta. And they discovered that he was not really teaching the real Dhamma. So they decided to go different ways and look for a teacher, and promise that if one discovers a teacher, they will immediately come and he will tell the other person. So this Upatissa was walking around in Rajgiri one day, and he saw this monk going on his alms rounds, very quiet, very serene, and he thought he must be enlightened. So when the monk finished his meal, Upatissa approached him and, "Sir, you must be enlightened. Who is your teacher and what is your teacher's teaching?" And this happened to be Arahant Assaji. Remember the 5 disciples that the Buddha gave his first talk to, Kondanya Baddiya Vappa Mahanama Assaji. So this was Assaji. And he said, "I am sorry, I have just become a monk only very recently. I don't know much about Buddha's teaching." Then the Upatissa said, "No, don't worry, just tell me in brief. Then I will understand." And then he chanted, Arahant Assaji chanted, "Ye Dhamma Hetu Pabhava," that everything that happens from a cause, Te Samhetum Tathagato Aha, the Tathagata, the Buddha said the cause of that. te sanchayo nirodho, and their cessation. And that was my teacher's teaching, Evam Vadi Mahasamana. So he gave in brief, the Buddha's teaching is about cause and effect. When there's a cause, there's an effect. When there is no cause, there is no effect. And this is the central formula of dependent origination. And that is in Pali, imasming sati idam hoti. When there is a cause, there's an effect. Imassu pada idam uppajjati. When the cause arises, an effect arises. Imasming asati idam nahoti. When there is not this does not come to be. So this is the central formula of dependent origination. When there is a cause, there's an effect. When a cause arises, an effect is there. When there is no cause, there's no effect. When the cause disappears, the effect also disappears. This is the central formula of dependent origination. So, and there is a commonality between dependent origination and Four Noble Truths, because the Four Noble Truths is also about cause and effect. And if you look at the Four Noble Truths, the first is the truth of universal suffering. Second, the cause of suffering. Third, the cessation of suffering. And the fourth, path leading to the cessation of suffering. So you can see the cause is the second truth. Cause of suffering, that is craving. Due to craving, you got suffering coming, effect, cause and effect. And then the fourth and the third, the path leading to the cessation of suffering, Noble Eightfold Path is the cause, and Nibbana is the effect. So there are two pairs of cause and effect. Craving causes suffering. When there is no craving, no suffering. Noble Eightfold Path, when you cultivate it, it leads to Nibbana. If not, no Nibbana. So there's again the commonality between the Four Noble Truths and the dependent origination. And what happened was, on the night that Buddha got enlightened, he started contemplating to see what causes this suffering, the aging and the death. And in fact, it is said that every Samma Sambuddha on the night of the enlightened, they contemplate and discover the dependent origination. And same way, the Gautama Buddha also contemplated what causes all this suffering, the aging and death. And then he discovered when there is birth, there is aging and death. Only when we are born, we are exposed to aging and death. And then he looked back. So what causes the birth, jati? The becoming, we'll discuss that in detail later. Becoming, bhava, causes the birth. And then look back again. So what causes becoming? It's a clinging that causes becoming. So what causes clinging? It's craving. Tanha causes clinging. And what causes craving? It's the feeling. Vedana causes craving. So what causes feeling? It's a contact called passa. And then he goes on like that. So what causes passa? It's the six sense organs. And what is the cause of six sense organs? It's the mind and matter, nama rupa. And what's the cause of mind and matter? Is consciousness. And what's the cause of consciousness? Is fabrications. And what is the cause of fabrication? Ignorance. Ignorance. So he went back from suffering, aging, and death, and ended up with ignorance as the cause. And this is the dependent origination in the forward change, the cause of suffering. Avijja paccaya sankhara, conditioned by ignorance, arises mental fabrications. Sankhara paccaya vijnanam, conditioned by mental fabrication, arises consciousness. Vijnana pacha nama rupam. Conditioned by consciousness arise mind and matter. Nama rupa pacha salayatana. Conditioned by mind and matter arise 6 sense spaces. Salayatana pacha passo. Conditioned by 6 sense bases arises contact. Passa pacha vedana. Conditioned by contact arises feeling. Vedana pacha tanha. Conditioned by feeling arises craving. Tanha pacha upadana. Conditioned by craving arises clinging. Upadana pacha bhava. Conditioned by clinging arises becoming. Bhava pacha jati. Conditioned by becoming arises birth. And then jati pacha jaya marana soka parideva dukkado manasupaya sasu. Is when we are born, conditioned by birth, arise aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, despair, everything. So there are 12 factors of dependent origination. Ignorance, avijja, mental fabrication, sankhara, consciousness, vijnana, mind and matter, nama rupa, 6 sense bases, salayatana, contact, passa, feeling, vedana, craving, tanha, clinging, upadana, becoming, bhava, birth, jati, and then aging and death. So 12 factors produced by dependent origination. Let us look at them one by one. Ignorance, avijja. And ignorance refers to a lack of proper understanding of the Four Noble Truths. So that we know the Four Noble Truths are there is universal suffering, dukkha satya, and there is a cause for suffering, samudaya satya, the cause is craving. And if this craving is removed, the suffering can be eradicated. That's the third truth, leading to Nibbana. And there's a path leading to Nibbana, and that is the Noble Eightfold Path. So it's a proper lack of proper understanding of the Four Noble Truths is ignorance. And because of the ignorance, we don't see things in reality. So we see things, impermanent things, as permanent. We think suffering as pleasure and happiness. We think when there is no self, we believe there is a self, the permanent self. So because of this ignorance, we don't see reality as reality and continue to collect mental defilements and continue in the samsara, the cycle of birth and death. So the second factor, sankhara, that's fabrications. And there's a discourse in the Samyutta Nikaya called Vibhanga Sutta, where Buddha explains the different factors, the 12 factors. And there the Buddha says the fabrications are what we do bodily, physically, what we do through our speech, and what we do mentally. So the actions that we do through our body, the speech, and the mind, and they are fabrications, and they lead to what we call karma, and then continued existence in the cycle of birth and death. Consciousness, vijnana. And Buddha described consciousness. Consciousness basically is awareness. So when, let us say, when some visual objects falls on the eye, we become aware, and that is consciousness, and that's called eye consciousness. When a sound falls on the ear, we become aware there is a sound falling on my ear, and that's the ear consciousness. When some smell reaches our nose, we become aware there is a smell in my nose, and that's called nose consciousness. When the taste falls on our tongue, we become aware. We don't identify them. It's just awareness of a presence of a taste. is called tongue consciousness. When we feel some touch in our body, we become aware that my body is feeling something. And that's called body consciousness. And then the mind consciousness. When a thought or something arises in our mind, we become aware, and that's called mind consciousness. And then obviously there's a relinking consciousness. This is the consciousness at the end of our life, the consciousness that causes the arisal of the next consciousness in the next birth. And that's called Patisandhi Vijnana. So Buddha described the consciousness in terms of the 6 sense bases: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness. And obviously consciousness that's called relinking. That's the link between this birth and the next birth. So that's Patisandhi Vijnana. And the next factor of dependent origination is mind and matter, nama rupa, nama rupa. And the rupa is the physical aspect, the bodily aspects, the matter, the form, and which is consistent of the 4 basic elements: the earth element, the solidity, patavi, the liquid watery elements, apo, the heat element, the tejo, and the air element, the vayu, and any secondary forms that are derived from this, and that they compose what's called matter. And then the mental aspects, Buddha described 5 factors related to the mind factor, and that, and the contact, again, kind of sense impression, and manasika, attention. So Buddha described these 5 factors as the mental aspect of mind, and patavi, apo, tejo, the earth element, water element, fire element, and then we have the eye base, chakku, ear base, sota, nose base, gana, tongue base, jivha, body base, kaya, mind base, mana. So everything that we received, all sense objects are received through any of these 6 sense bases. Next one is called contact. That's passa. Passa means sense impression. So as I said, we got the eye, and the visual object falls on the eye, and then we become aware of it. And that's, I said, eye consciousness. And the 3 of them together is what makes the contact, sense impression. So we got the ear, and a sound falls on the ear, and we become aware of that sound. That's called consciousness, ear consciousness. So the 3 of them together, the ear, the sound, and the ear consciousness, and those 3 make up the ear contact. So like that, with regard to the 6 sense organs, there are 6 contacts: eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, and mind contact. And it is from contact that the feeling arises. So again, there are 6 types of feelings based on the contact. So a feeling arising from the eye contact, feeling arises from the ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, and mind contact. So how it develops is, we got the eye, and the visual object falls on the eye. We become aware of that. That's called eye consciousness. And the eye and the visual object and the eye consciousness together is called the contact. And from contact arises the feeling. So there are 6 sources of feeling, the 6 sense organs. And obviously, the type of feeling arising from each could be a pleasant feeling, a sukha vedana. It could be an unpleasant or painful feeling, dukkha vedana, or it could be a neutral feeling. Neutral. And the feeling gives rise to craving. So whenever there is a pleasant feeling, naturally it will lead to craving. And then again, Buddha said, there are 6 sources, types of craving, tanha. So we can develop craving for the visual objects we see through the eye. We can develop craving for the sounds that we hear. We can develop craving for the smells that we feel. We can develop craving for the taste we feel. We can develop craving for fine touches that the body feels. And we can develop craving for ideas, thoughts, mental objects that arises in the mind. So there are 6 types of craving. And the craving leads to clinging. So clinging, Buddha described 4 types of clinging. The first, we cling to pleasurable experiences, calm upadana. So we become attached, we grasp pleasant visual objects that we see through the eye. And we grasp, we cling to nice sounds we hear, or the nice smells, nice taste, nice touches, nice ideas. So that Buddha said, calm upadana, attachment to pleasurable experiences. And the second type of clinging that Buddha described was to clinging to wrong views. We all got different opinions, different decisions, our own ideas, beliefs, everything, and we are stuck to them. We cling to them, we grasp them. And that's called ditta upadana, clinging to wrong views. And then the third type of clinging is we cling to rituals and rules and rituals for everything. If I have to do this, I have to do that. Unless I do this, I can't get that. And there are rituals and rites even with regard to Nibbana, that only if I do this, I'll go to Nibbana. So getting attached to those rites and rituals, Buddha said, that's also clinging. And finally, Buddha said, the clinging to the belief of a self, that there's an I, there's a me, it's mine. So when there is no self, when there is no soul, clinging to a belief that there's I, there is me, there is somebody, and that's also clinging. So there are 4 types of clinging that Buddha described in Dependent Origination. And the clinging then gives rise to becoming, bhava. This is the setting the stage for a re-becoming, rebirth. And Buddha described 3 types of becoming. When we do kamma that will take us to the next rebirth in a sensual world. And here the sensual world include 11 worlds. Remember, according to Buddhist cosmology, there are 31 different planes of existence. And 11 of them belongs to the sensual becoming. And the 4 apayas, the 4 worlds of suffering, they are in the kama bhava, sensual. Then the 5th one is the human existence. And there are 6 heavens, sensual heavens. So when we do a certain type of kamma, sensual kamma, we end up in a kama bhava, sensual world, in one of those 11. And the second type of becoming is the fine material, rupa. And this is when we meditate and develop certain jhanas, deep absorptions. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th jhanas, material, deep absorptions are developed through meditation. They take us to a rebirth in this fine material becoming, and there are 16 of them. So there are 11 planes of existence, sensual world. There are 16 planes of existence, fine material. They are called rupa bhava. And the third type of becoming Buddha described was immaterial or formless, and that's arupa bhava. And this again is attained by developing 4 jhanas, 4 arupa jhanas, immaterial jhanas. So altogether, there are 31 planes of existence according to Buddhist cosmology. And in becoming, one could be born in one of the 11 sensual worlds. One could be born in one of the 16 fine material worlds, rupa bhava, or one could be born in one of the immaterial formless worlds called arupa bhava. So that is the setting the stage to for rebirth. And then becoming leads to jati, birth. And Buddha described in one of the discourses what he meant by birth. That's the descent into a womb, arising, appearance of the khandhas. Remember the khandhas, 5 aggregates, rupa, vedana, sanya, sankara, vijnana, and that's again a birth. Or the acquisition of the bases, 6 sense bases, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. So Buddha described birth as appearance of those. And Buddha has also described 4 types of birth, how living beings can be born. The first is andaja, that's the conception through an egg, like birds and things like that. Or conception in a mother's womb, like us and mammals. Or extraneous conception, this is when there is something rotting or something moist, little ants and little creatures appears, that's called samsedaja. And then spontaneous conception called opapatika. So out of the 31 planes of existence that the Buddha described, in the human world and the animal world, you have these first 3, conception in an egg, conception in a mother's womb, and extraneous conception. So these 3 forms of birth takes place in those 2 planes of existence, human and animal. And in all the other 29 of planes of existence is spontaneous conception. So whether we are talking about the apayas, the suffering world, or whether we are talking about the heavens, the sensual heavens, the 6, or whether we are talking about the 20 Brahma worlds, all the births taking place there are spontaneous. So 4 types of birth: conception in an egg, mother's womb, extraneous, and spontaneous, opapatika. And then aging and death, And Buddha described aging as decrepitude, brokenness, graying, wrinkling, decline of life force, weakening of the faculties. And the death, whatever is decreasing, passing away, breaking up, disappearing, death, completion of time, break off of the aggregates, all sorts of things, all definitions of death. So going back to the 12, okay. So the first factor of the 12 factor dependent origination is ignorance. Second, the karma, the acts we do due to ignorance, physical, mental, and verbal. And then that consciousness, then the mind and matter, then the 6 sense organs, then that from the 6 organs you get contact, pascha, and because of the contact, feeling arises. When there's feeling, there's craving. Craving leads to clinging. Clinging sets the stage for rebirth, becoming, and then the birth, and ends up in aging, death, and all the suffering. So 12 factors of dependent origination. Now, when Buddha said dependent origination, he always said it is in relation to 2 factors. Remember, first I said there's a central formula for dependent origination, and that is when there's a cause, there's an effect. When there is no cause, there's no effect. That's the dependent origination central formula. Now, the dependent origination is in relation to two factors. So let us say avijja pachya sankhara. Ignorance leads to fabrication, and that is paticca samuppada, dependent origination. Then the mental sankhara pachya vijnana. Fabrications leads to consciousness. That is paticca samuppada, dependent origination. So that means in 12 factors of dependent originations, there are 11 examples of dependent origination, the 11 links between the 12 factors. So there are 12 individual factors and 11 chains, 11 links of paticca samuppada, dependent origination. Now then, what Buddha did was, having gone back from suffering and death back to ignorance, then he again started contemplating what has to not be there for there to be not be there death or suffering. And he contemplated and discovered if there is no birth, there's no aging or no death. And then he thought, okay, what has not to be there for there not to be birth? And bhava, that means if there is no becoming, there's no birth. If there's no clinging, there's no becoming. If there's no craving, there's no clinging. If there is no feeling, there's no clinging. If there is no contact, there is no feeling. If there are no six sense objects, no contact. If there are no nama rupa, mind and matter, there are no sense organs. And if there is no consciousness, there's no mind and matter. And if there are no fabrications, there's no mind and matter. And if there is no ignorance, there's no fabrications. So this is the reverse cycle. This is the reverse cycle. That means when there is no ignorance, that's when there is wisdom, there's now no fabrications. When there are no fabrications, no consciousness. When there is no consciousness, there's no mind and matter. When there's no mind and matter, there are no six sense bases. And when there are no six sense bases, no contact. When there's no contact, no feeling. When there's no feeling, there's no craving. When there's no craving, there's no clinging. When there is no clinging, there's no becoming. When there's no becoming, there's no birth. If there is no birth, there is no suffering, no aging, no death, no suffering. So the first one was dependent origination in forward change, where the Buddha explained how the suffering arises. And in the reverse change, Buddha explains how the suffering can be eradicated by eradicating ignorance. Let us go. Yeah. There's another discourse called Sammaditthi Sutta, that's in the Majjhima Nikaya, the collection of the middle length discourses, which is actually preached by Arahant Sariputta. And in that discourse, the Arahant Sariputta describes 16 ways of developing Sammaditthi. And developing Sammaditthi is becoming Sotapanna. And out of the 16 ways of developing Sammaditthi, he describes 12 means of developing Sammaditthi. So we can really, if we really understand one link of the dependent origination, whether it's ignorance leading to fabrications, or fabrications lead to consciousness, if we can link, really understand one link, we can develop Sammaditthi and become a Sotapanna. For example, let us take aging and death. If we can realize what aging and death is, if we can realize what the origin of aging and death is, if we can realize the cessation, how the aging and death can be eradicated, and if we can realize the way to do it, then we can develop samadhi. Now you can see in this formula, what we are really seeing is the Four Noble Truths. Yeah. So what is aging and death? The first noble truth, suffering. Origin of aging and death, the cause of suffering. The second noble truth, cessation of aging and death. Third noble truth, cessation of suffering. Path leading to cessation. Fourth noble truth, the Noble Eightfold Path. So in each link of the dependent origination, there is really four noble truths to be realized. So that means there are 11 opportunities in the dependent origination for us to develop samadhi and become a sotapanna, according to this discourse. Now, there are different interpretations of dependent originations. The famous is obviously in this book called Path of Purification, Visuddhimagga. This was written by Venerable Buddhaghosa, who went from India to Sri Lanka and wrote this book. And he wrote a number of commentaries to the Pali Canon. And he described that these 12 factors can be spread over 3 lifetimes. That is, he put ignorance and fabrications, the 2 factors, into the past life, which gives rise to birth in this life. And then the 8 factors from consciousness to becoming in the present life. And the remaining 3, the birth, aging, and death to future life. So he divided the 12 factors into 3 lifetimes. And then he also, same, Buddhaghosa, he showed that there are 3 definite links between in the 12 factors. And the first link is between the past causes and the present effect. So the past causes in the past were between the fabrications. Because of the fabrication, the karma we did during the last birth led to the relinking consciousness in this life. So there was a link between the fabrications and consciousness. And then in this life, the feeling leads to craving. And that's again a link there. There's again a link. And then the last factor of this life called becoming, and the first factor of next life, birth, there's a link. So he presented 3 links among the 12 factors. And again, he divides them into 4 sections. This is all cause and effect. The past, the cause in the previous life, the effect in this life, and the cause that we create in this life, and the effect of that cause as birth in the next life. So there's another theory, another present interpretation, is that the 12 links of dependent origination can happen moment to moment in this life. It doesn't have to be spread over 3 lifetimes. And that's mainly brought by a Buddhist scholar from Sri Lanka called Jnanananda, Katukurunde Jnanananda. And there's a school of thought like that. So there are 2 main interpretations of dependent origination. Now, the Buddha said that dependent origination is really Buddha's teaching. And in this discourse called Mahahattipadam Sutra, it's also in the Majjhima Nikaya, Yo paticca samuppadam passati, so dhammam passati. If one sees dependent origination, he is seeing the teaching, Buddha's teaching. Yo dhammam passati, so paticca samuppadam passati. If one sees the teaching, he sees dependent origination. So really, what is said here is that the Buddha's teaching is dependent origination, and dependent origination is Buddha's teaching. So the final goal of the Buddhist practice has to be to escape from the cycle of dependent origination, so that there is no rebirth and there is no more suffering. And that's the end. Thank you very much.